This officer and her police dog were left to die in blizzard crash until a Hell's Angel arrived. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead as Officer Sarah Matthews leaned back in her chair, her eyes fixed on the darkening sky through the station's window. The weather had been turning steadily worse throughout her shift, and now heavy clouds loomed above, promising a fierce winter storm. Rex, her loyal German shepherd, lay at her feet, his chin resting on his paws but his ears alert to every sound. Sarah reached for her phone, her weathered fingers tapping the screen to check the forecast. The weather app confirmed her suspicions. A severe blizzard warning flashed across the screen in bold red letters. The storm was expected to hit within hours, bringing dangerous conditions and near-zero visibility. "Looks like we're in for a rough night, buddy," she said softly to Rex, who lifted his head at the sound of her voice. His brown eyes met hers with unwavering loyalty, and she couldn't help but smile. After years of working together, Rex could read her moods better than any human partner ever had. The evening shift was winding down, but Sarah knew her work wasn't finished. She pulled up the patrol route on her computer, studying the roads she needed to cover. The familiar streets and neighborhoods appeared on the screen, places she'd patrolled countless times over her 15 years on the force. Tonight, though, those same streets would become treacherous as the storm moved in. Other officers were already heading home, their boots squeaking against the linoleum floor as they passed her desk. A few called out their goodbyes, but Sarah barely heard them. Her mind was focused on the task ahead. The weight of responsibility settled on her shoulders like a familiar coat, sometimes heavy, but always necessary. "Officer Matthews," called dispatcher Jenny from across the room. "You sure you don't want to call it a night? Storm's going to be nasty." Sarah shook her head, her gray-streaked hair catching the harsh overhead light. "Someone needs to be out there, Jenny. Might as well be me and Rex." She gathered her gear methodically, checking her flashlight, radio, and emergency supplies. Each item had its place. Each piece of equipment could mean the difference between life and death on a night like this. Rex watched her preparations, his tail thumping against the floor when she reached for his leash. The first snowflakes were starting to fall as Sarah and Rex stepped out into the parking lot. The wind had picked up, carrying a bitter chill that cut through her heavy uniform jacket. Rex's fur ruffled in the gusting wind as they made their way to the patrol car. Sarah opened the back door first, and Rex jumped in, settling into his familiar spot. She could hear him shifting around, getting comfortable as she slid behind the wheel. The engine rumbled to life, and she cranked up the heat, watching the wipers push away the increasing snowfall. Just as she put the car in drive, the radio crackled. "Dispatch to Unit 14. Sarah reached for the radio. "Unit 14, go ahead. We've got reports of an abandoned vehicle on Highway 23, mile marker 45. Caller was concerned someone might be stranded." Sarah glanced at the swirling snow outside, then checked her watch. The storm was moving in faster than expected, but there was still time to check it out before conditions became too dangerous. "Copy that, dispatch. Unit 14 responding." She put the car in drive, flicked on her headlights, and pulled out of the station parking lot. In the back seat, Rex sat up straighter, alert and ready for whatever lay ahead. "Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story." Sarah's hands gripped the steering wheel firmly as she guided the patrol car through the thickening snowfall. The headlights carved twin paths through the darkness, but the swirling white flakes made it hard to see more than 20 feet ahead. The empty road stretched before her like a ribbon disappearing into a wall of white. In the back seat, Rex sat upright, his ears perked forward, and his dark eyes focused on the road ahead. His steady presence gave Sarah comfort as she leaned forward, squinting through the windshield. The wipers worked overtime, sweeping away the heavy snow that threatened to obscure her view completely. "Steady there, boy," Sarah murmured, glancing at Rex in the rearview mirror. The German Shepherd's tail thumped once against the seat in response. After years of working together, they could practically read each other's minds. The wind howled outside, rocking the patrol car. Sarah clicked the heater up another notch, but the cold seemed to seep in through every crack. She checked the dashboard clock. 8:47 p.m. The abandoned vehicle was reportedly somewhere near mile marker 23, just a few miles ahead. "Weather's getting worse by the minute," Sarah said, more to herself than to Rex. The radio crackled with static, making her jump. She adjusted the volume, but the interference was getting stronger as the storm intensified. Suddenly, a gust of wind slammed into the side of the patrol car, pushing it toward the shoulder. Sarah corrected carefully, her heart racing. The speedometer showed she'd already dropped to 30 miles per hour, but even that felt too fast in these conditions. Rex whined softly from the back seat. Sarah glanced in the mirror again and saw him shifting restlessly. "I know, buddy. I don't like this either." The patrol car's tires crunched over what felt like a patch of ice. Sarah's grip tightened on the wheel as she felt the subtle shift in traction. Years of experience had taught her to respect winter roads, especially in conditions like these. Without warning, the back end of the car began to slide. Sarah's training kicked in. Don't slam the brakes, turn into the skid. But the ice had other plans. The steering wheel seemed to have a mind of its own as the car began to spin. "Hold on, Rex," Sarah called out. The world outside became a blur of white as the patrol car rotated. She caught glimpses of the road, then the trees, then the road again. Rex barked sharply, bracing himself against the seat. The impact came suddenly, a crushing jolt as the car slammed sideways into a snowbank. Sarah's head snapped forward, then back against the headrest. Pain shot through her neck and shoulder. In the back, she heard Rex yelp. When the world stopped spinning, Sarah found herself staring at a wall of white, the snowbank now pressed against her driver's side window. She tried to move and gasped at the pain in her shoulder. "Rex!" she called out, her voice shaky. "You okay, boy?" A whimper from the back seat answered her. She turned carefully in her seat and saw Rex favoring his right front paw, but he was conscious and alert. Sarah reached for her phone. No signal. The radio crackled uselessly, producing nothing but static. She tried starting the car, but the engine just clicked weakly. The realization hit her like another physical blow. They were stranded in the middle of nowhere, in a worsening blizzard, with no way to call for help. The wind screamed around the patrol car, and the snow was already starting to pile up against the windows. Sarah looked at Rex, who met her gaze with worried brown eyes. They were in serious trouble. The crumpled hood of the patrol car steamed in the frigid air. Sarah's head throbbed as she pushed open the driver's side door, her gloved hands shaking. The wind howled around her, driving sharp needles of snow against her face. Her first thought wasn't about her own safety. It was about Rex. "Rex!" she called out, her voice barely audible over the storm. She heard a whimper from the back seat. "Hold on, boy, I'm coming." Sarah grabbed onto the car frame for support as she made her way to the rear door. Her legs felt wobbly, and she could feel a warm trickle of blood on her forehead where she'd hit the steering wheel. The door handle was already collecting ice, but she managed to pull it open. Rex lay on his side, his brown eyes alert but worried. Sarah ran her hands over him carefully, checking for injuries. He winced slightly when she touched his right front paw, but otherwise seemed okay. "That's my brave boy," she whispered, relief washing over her. The temperature was dropping fast. Sarah could feel it in her bones, the kind of cold that seeps right through your clothes and settles in your core. She knew they needed shelter. And fast. The patrol car wasn't going anywhere, its front end buried deep in the snowbank. Come on, Rex. Easy now. She helped her partner out of the back seat, supporting him as he tested his weight on the injured paw. He limped but could walk, and Sarah felt a surge of gratitude. At least they could move. The trunk release button clicked, and Sarah fought against the wind to open it. Inside, she found what she was looking for, the emergency kit she always kept stocked. Her frozen fingers fumbled with the zipper, finally pulling out 2 silver emergency blankets. Here we go, boy! Sarah wrapped one around Rex first, making sure to cover his body completely. The metallic material crinkled as she secured it around him. Then she unfolded the second one for herself, the thin material offering surprising warmth against the bitter cold. Back in the relative shelter of the car, Sarah tried her radio again. Static. Her phone showed no bars, the screen mockingly bright in the darkness. She'd already tried the emergency channel twice, but the storm was blocking all signals. Through the windshield, Sarah could barely see 10 feet ahead. The snow swirled in thick white sheets, creating an impenetrable wall of white. The wind rocked the car, its haunting whistle a reminder of just how alone they were. Rex pressed against her side, his warm body a comfort in the growing cold. Sarah wrapped her arm around him, pulling him closer. Despite his own discomfort, he licked her hand, trying to offer comfort as he always did. "What are we going to do, Rex?" Sarah whispered, her voice catching. In 15 years of service, she'd never felt so helpless. The reality of their situation hit her hard. No communication, no way to call for help, and a storm that showed no signs of letting up. She checked her watch. 9:47 p.m. The temperature gauge on her dashboard read 12 degrees and falling. Sarah knew the car's battery wouldn't last forever, and when it died, they'd lose what little heat the engine was providing. Rex whined softly, sensing her distress. Sarah looked down at her faithful partner, trying to keep the fear out of her voice. "I know, boy. I know." But as another gust of wind shook the car, she couldn't shake the feeling that they were in serious trouble. The wind howled like a wounded animal, whipping snow in every direction. Sarah pulled Rex closer, trying to shield him from the brutal cold with the emergency blanket. Her fingers had gone numb, and her teeth chattered uncontrollably. The crash had left her with a painful gash on her forehead, and she could feel warm blood mixing with the melting snowflakes on her face. "We'll be okay, boy," she whispered to Rex, but her voice trembled with uncertainty. The loyal dog pressed against her side, offering what warmth he could. His brown eyes watched her with concern, and he whined softly, sensing her distress. Through the thick curtain of snow, a pinpoint of light caught Sarah's attention. At first, she thought her mind was playing tricks on her, the cold and exhaustion creating false hope. She blinked hard, trying to clear her vision. The light remained, growing stronger. "Do you see that, Rex?" she asked, her voice barely audible above the storm. Rex's ears perked up, and he lifted his head. A low rumble cut through the whistling wind, growing louder with each passing second. Sarah squinted into the darkness, hardly daring to believe what she was seeing. The single headlight drew closer, and she could make out the outline of a motorcycle, somehow managing to stay upright in the treacherous conditions. The bike slowed as it approached, its tire tracks quickly disappearing under fresh snow. Sarah's police instincts kicked in, despite her weakened state. Who would be crazy enough to ride a motorcycle in a blizzard? She tried to stand straighter, one hand automatically reaching for her service weapon, but her frozen fingers could barely grip the handle. Rex remained alert but calm beside her, which surprised her. Usually, he was more protective when strangers approached. The motorcycle came to a stop about 10 feet from them, its engine idling with a deep purr that seemed out of place in the winter storm. The rider was massive, covered in black leather from head to toe. Snow had collected on his broad shoulders, making him look like some sort of winter giant emerging from the storm. He switched off the engine, and the sudden silence felt heavy in Sarah's ears. Slowly, deliberately, the figure reached up and removed his helmet. The man underneath had a weathered face marked with deep lines and a thick beard streaked with gray. Despite his intimidating size and appearance, his eyes held a gentle concern that made Sarah hesitate before drawing her weapon. "Officer Matthews?" His voice was deep but quiet, barely carrying over the wind. "I'm Bobby Davis. Some folks call me Hawk." He stayed where he was, making no sudden movements, clearly aware of how threatening he might appear. Sarah's mind raced through her mental database of local residents. Bobby Hawk Davis, the former Hells Angel who'd moved to the woods outside town a few years back. She'd heard stories about him from other officers, about his past life and his current solitary existence. "I know who you are," she managed through chattering teeth. "What are you doing out here?" "I live about 3 miles up the road," he said, gesturing vaguely through the snow. "Saw your lights when you went off the road. Figured nobody else would be coming through this storm." He paused, studying her condition. "You're hurt and freezing. Let me help you both." Sarah looked down at Rex, then back at the wrecked patrol car. The cold was seeping deeper into her bones with each passing minute. She knew they wouldn't survive much longer out here, and Bobby Davis was offering their only chance. "Okay," she said finally, her voice weak but determined. "We'll accept your help." Through the swirling snow, Bobby's large hands carefully helped Sarah to her feet. Her body ached, and her uniform was already stiff with frost. Rex whimpered softly, his dark fur dusted white. "I'll get you both on safely," Bobby said, his voice barely audible over the howling wind. "Just hold on tight." Sarah watched as Bobby first secured Rex in a makeshift sling he created from his leather jacket, wrapping it around his broad chest. The dog remained surprisingly calm, as if sensing this stranger meant no harm. Then Bobby turned to Sarah, his weathered face etched with concern. "Can you hold on to me?" he asked. Sarah nodded, though her fingers felt numb. Bobby helped her onto the motorcycle behind him, positioning her arms around his waist. The leather of his vest was cold against her cheek as she pressed against his back. "Don't let go," he instructed, kick-starting the motorcycle. The engine roared to life, and they lurched forward into the white darkness. Sarah's teeth chattered as the wind cut through her wet clothes. She could feel Rex's warmth pressed between them, the dog's steady breathing somehow reassuring despite their predicament. Bobby handled the motorcycle with surprising skill, weaving through the worst of the drifts. His body tensed whenever they hit a particularly rough patch, silently warning Sarah to hold tighter. The snow stung her face, but she kept her eyes open enough to see the path ahead illuminated by the motorcycle's headlight. Minutes stretched like hours as they pushed through the storm. Sarah's grip began to weaken from the cold, but Bobby reached down occasionally to pat her hands, wordlessly encouraging her to hang on. Rex remained perfectly still, trusting their unlikely savior. Finally, a dark shape emerged from the whiteness, a small cabin nestled among snow-laden pines. Bobby guided the motorcycle right up to the front door, cutting the engine in one smooth motion. The sudden silence felt heavy, broken only by the whistle of wind through the trees. "We're here," Bobby said simply, helping Sarah dismount. Her legs nearly buckled, but his strong grip kept her upright. He carefully unwrapped Rex from the makeshift sling, setting the dog gently on the snow-covered ground. Bobby produced a key from his pocket, and opened the cabin door. Warm air rushed out to meet them, and Sarah could see the orange glow of a banked fire in the fireplace. He ushered them inside, Rex padding in ahead of them. The cabin was small but tidy, with simple furniture and thick rugs covering the wooden floor. A pot-bellied stove in the corner radiated heat, and the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls. Sarah's legs finally gave out, and she sank into a worn armchair near the fire. Rex settled at her feet with a tired sigh, pressing his body against her legs. Sarah's hands shook as she reached down to scratch behind his ears, overwhelmed by how close they had come to freezing in that snowbank. The reality of their rescue began to sink in. A former Hell's Angel had just saved their lives. Bobby moved quietly around the cabin, hanging up his snow-covered clothes and adding wood to both the stove and fireplace. Sarah watched him through half-closed eyes, her body finally beginning to thaw in the blessed warmth. Her mind felt fuzzy, struggling to process everything that had happened since the crash. She leaned back in the chair, her uniform slowly dripping onto the rug beneath her. Rex's steady breathing beside her legs provided a familiar comfort in this strange place. The heat from the fire wrapped around her like a blanket, and Sarah felt her eyes growing heavy, the evening's terror giving way to pure exhaustion. The warmth of Bobby's cabin slowly seeped into Sarah's bones as she sat wrapped in thick wool blankets. Her uniform was soaked through, and her hands trembled as she held the steaming mug of herbal tea Bobby had given her. Rex lay at her feet, his wet fur gradually drying near the crackling fireplace. Bobby moved with quiet efficiency, gathering medical supplies from a cabinet. His large frame and tattoo-covered arms seemed at odds with the gentle way he approached her. "Mind if I take a look at that cut on your forehead?" he asked, his voice low and steady. Sarah nodded, wincing as he cleaned the wound with antiseptic. Despite her years of training to be cautious of strangers, something about his careful movements and calm demeanor made her feel safe. "Thank you," she managed, her voice hoarse from the cold. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't found us." "Sometimes we're just where we need to be," Bobby replied, applying a bandage to her forehead. He checked her pupils with a small flashlight, his weathered face creased with concentration. "Any dizziness? Nausea?" "A little dizzy," Sarah admitted, taking another sip of tea. The cabin was simple but well-maintained, with hand-carved furniture and neatly stacked firewood, not what she'd expected from someone who looked like he belonged in a rough biker bar. Bobby nodded and moved to check on Rex, running his hands gently over the dog's legs and sides. Rex, usually wary of strangers, allowed the examination without protest. "Your partner here seems okay, just shaken up," he said, scratching behind Rex's ears. Sarah watched as Rex's tail wagged slightly. "He's usually more protective," she observed. "He seems to trust you." "Animals know," Bobby said simply, standing to add another log to the fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on the walls, and the wind howled outside, making the cabin's warmth feel even more precious. After ensuring they were both comfortable, Bobby settled into a worn armchair across from them. His presence was steady, undemanding. Sarah found herself studying him, the gray at his temples, the way his hands, though large and scarred, moved with surprising grace. "I've heard about you," she said finally. "You fix people's cars when they break down. Help stranded hikers." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "But I never knew why someone would choose to live so far from town." Bobby was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the fire. "Used to be a different person," he said finally. "Rode with the Hells Angels for 15 years. Did things I'm not proud of." His voice carried no self-pity, just simple honesty. Sarah felt her police officer instincts prickle, but they were quickly overshadowed by the reality of her situation. This man had just saved her life. Something happened about 7 years ago, Bobby continued, absently rubbing a faded tattoo on his wrist. Made me realize I needed to change. Found this place, started fixing things. Machines, mostly. Sometimes people too, when they need it. He looked at her directly, his eyes clear and steady. Everyone deserves a second chance at doing right. Sarah felt something shift in her perception. The intimidating exterior melted away, revealing someone who had faced his demons and chosen a different path. In its place was a man who had transformed his life into one of quiet service to others. Rex stretched out more comfortably, completely at ease now. Sarah smiled slightly, realizing that her faithful partner had already figured out what she was just beginning to understand. Sometimes help comes from the most unexpected places. The crackling fireplace cast warm shadows across Bobby's cabin walls as Sarah sat wrapped in a thick blanket, her hands cupped around a steaming mug of homemade soup. Rex lay curled at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch Bobby move around the small kitchen. The storm howled outside, but in here, it felt like they were in another world entirely. "You should eat," Bobby said quietly, settling into an old armchair across from her. "It'll help warm you up from the inside." Sarah took a careful sip of the soup, surprised by its rich flavor. "This is really good. Did you make this yourself?" Bobby nodded, a slight smile crossing his weathered face. "Living alone in the woods, you learn to cook or starve." He paused, studying her for a moment. "How long have you been on the force?" 15 years now, Sarah replied, her voice softening with memories. "Started right after college. Everyone thought I was crazy to choose such a small town, but..." She shrugged. It felt right. "And Rex?" Bobby gestured to the dog, who perked up at the mention of his name. "He's been with me for 7 of those years." Sarah reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "Best partner I could ask for. We've been through everything together. Drug busts, search and rescue missions, community outreach programs." Her voice caught slightly. "If anything had happened to him today..." "But it didn't," Bobby interjected gently. "You both made it." Sarah nodded, taking another sip of soup. "It's funny, you know, all these years of helping others, and tonight I'm the one who needed saving." She looked up at Bobby. "Why were you out there anyway? In weather like this?" Bobby was quiet for a moment, his hands clasped together. "Sometimes the storm outside matches the one inside. Riding helps me think." He met her gaze. "Left the Angels 15 years ago, but some days the past feels closer than others." Sarah found herself leaning forward slightly. "What made you leave?" "Saw too much. Did too much." Bobby's voice was low but steady. "One night, everything changed. Realized I was becoming someone I didn't want to be anymore. Walked away the next day." He gestured around the cabin. "Found this place, fixed it up, started doing honest work as a mechanic." The wind rattled the windows, making Rex lift his head alertly before settling back down. Sarah watched Bobby, noting how his tattoos seemed at odds with the gentle way he spoke, how his imposing size contrasted with his careful movements. "Must have been hard," she said softly. "Starting over." "Hardest thing I've ever done," Bobby admitted. "But necessary. Like setting a broken bone, hurts like hell, but it's the only way to heal right." Sarah felt something shift inside her, a recognition of sorts. Here was someone who understood what it meant to dedicate your life to something, to question it, to change course when necessary. Yet uncertainty lingered at the edges of her mind. The storm's fury increased, making the cabin's timbers creak. Bobby stood up and added another log to the fire. "Storm's not letting up," he observed. "You'll have to stay the night. Guest room's down the hall. simple but warm. Sarah nodded, feeling both grateful and slightly uneasy. Rex pressed against her leg, sensing her mixed emotions. She knew she had no choice. The blizzard made travel impossible. But trusting a former Hell's Angel, despite his kindness, went against years of law enforcement instincts. "Thank you," she said finally, meaning it despite her reservations. "For everything." The morning light barely penetrated through the thick curtain of falling snow outside Bobby's cabin. Sarah sat at the worn kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of coffee. Rex lay at her feet, occasionally lifting his head to watch Bobby move around the kitchen, preparing a simple breakfast of eggs and toast. "Storm's not letting up," Bobby said, his voice quiet and steady. "But I can get you back to town if you're feeling up to it. Bike handles better in the snow than most people think." Sarah looked down at her coffee, uncertainty clouding her thoughts. The warmth and safety of the cabin made the idea of venturing back into the blizzard less than appealing. Before she could respond, 3 sharp knocks echoed through the small space. Rex immediately stood at attention, a low growl rumbling in his throat. "Easy, boy," Sarah whispered, placing a calming hand on his head. Bobby moved toward the door, his movements careful and deliberate. When he opened it, Sheriff Tom Caldwell stood in the doorway, snow coating his uniform and hat. His face, already red from the cold, darkened further when he saw Sarah sitting at the table. "Officer Matthews," he said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. "When we found your patrol car abandoned, we feared the worst." His eyes darted between Sarah and Bobby, his jaw tightening. "What in God's name are you doing here?" Sarah stood up, wincing slightly from her injuries. "Sheriff, Bobby found us after the crash. He brought us here to—" "You took an injured officer from the scene of an accident?" Caldwell interrupted, turning to Bobby. His hand instinctively moved to rest on his holstered weapon. "Do you have any idea how many resources we've wasted searching for her?" Bobby remained calm, his hands visible at his sides. "She was freezing to death, Sheriff. The dog, too. I did what needed to be done." "What needed to be done?" Caldwell's voice rose. "What needed to be done was leaving her where she was. We had search parties out all night looking for her, professional rescue teams who know how to handle these situations." Sarah stepped forward, Rex moving protectively to her side. "Sheriff, please. Bobby saved our lives. If he hadn't found us when he did—" "Officer Matthews," Caldwell cut her off again, his tone sharp. "You're in no condition to make that assessment. This man," he gestured at Bobby, "has no authority to make decisions about your safety. He should have reported your location and waited for proper help to arrive." Bobby stayed silent, his expression neutral, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. The sheriff's words hung heavy in the air, making the small cabin feel even more cramped. "I want you ready to leave in 5 minutes," Caldwell ordered Sarah. "We're getting you proper medical attention." He turned to Bobby, his voice cold. "As for you, we'll be having a discussion about interfering with police business." Sarah felt torn. Part of her wanted to defend Bobby, to explain how he'd risked his own life to save her and Rex. But years of respecting the chain of command made her hesitate. She looked at Bobby, who gave her a slight nod, as if to say it was okay. "I'll get my things," she said quietly, her voice barely hiding her conflicted emotions. Rex stayed close to her side as she gathered her belongings, while the sheriff and Bobby stood in tense silence, the storm outside matching the turbulent atmosphere within the cabin. Sheriff Caldwell's boots left muddy tracks on Bobby's clean wooden floor as he paced back and forth. His face was red with anger, and his badge gleamed under the cabin's dim lighting. "Officer Matthews, I expected better judgment from you," he said, his voice sharp and cold. "Getting into a vehicle, or should I say motorcycle, with a known criminal, what were you thinking?" Sarah stood up straighter, though her body still ached from the crash. Rex pressed against her leg, sensing her distress. "With all due respect, Sheriff, Bobby saved our lives. The storm was getting worse by the minute. We wouldn't have survived the night in that wreck." "That's not the point!" The sheriff's hand slammed down on the kitchen table, making the cups rattle. "We had search parties ready to go. The moment we got word of your crash, we mobilized. Instead, we find your patrol car abandoned, and you're nowhere to be found." Bobby leaned against the wall, his arms crossed over his chest. His face remained calm, but Sarah could see the tension in his shoulders. He'd been nothing but kind to her, and now he was being treated like a criminal all over again. "Sheriff?" Sarah tried again, her voice steady despite her growing frustration. "The visibility was zero. The temperature was dropping fast. Bobby was there when nobody else was. He didn't just pick me up. He brought us here, gave us shelter, treated our injuries." The sheriff turned to Bobby, his eyes narrow with suspicion. "And why exactly were you out riding in a blizzard, Davis? Seems mighty convenient, doesn't it?" "Sometimes a man needs to clear his head," Bobby answered quietly. "Been doing it for years. Ask anyone around here." "Oh, I'll be asking plenty of questions," Caldwell sneered. "And you—" He turned back to Sarah. "You've compromised your position as an officer, consorting with ex-cons, accepting help from someone with his background. What message does that send to the community?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "The message that when someone needs help, it doesn't matter who offers it? That people can change?" "People like him don't change," Caldwell spat. "Once a Hell's Angel, always a Hell's Angel. You of all people should know better. How many bikers have you arrested? How many lives have they ruined?" The words hung heavy in the air. Sarah glanced at Bobby, saw the slight flinch in his otherwise stoic expression. She thought about the gentle way he had treated Rex, the careful attention he'd paid to her injuries, the warm food he'd prepared without asking for anything in return. "I know what I see in front of me," Sarah said firmly, though doubt was beginning to creep into her mind. "Bobby helped us when we needed it most." "Well, your judgment is clearly impaired from the accident," Caldwell replied dismissively. "We'll discuss this further at the station. For now, I'm taking you and Rex back to town. The roads are finally clearing enough for safe travel." Sarah felt torn. The sheriff's words made her question everything. Her decision to trust Bobby, her judgment as an officer, her very ability to read people. Had she let her desperate situation cloud her judgment? Should she have waited for official help, even if it meant risking their lives? Bobby remained silent through it all, his eyes meeting Sarah's briefly. There was no anger there, no defense, just a quiet acceptance that spoke of years of dealing with similar prejudice. Somehow that made Sarah feel even worse. Rex whined softly, picking up on the tension in the room. Sarah placed a hand on his head, seeking comfort in his familiar presence. The storm outside had calmed, but inside, a different kind of storm was brewing, one of doubt, guilt, and conflicting loyalties. Sarah stared into the crackling fire, her mind replaying the sheriff's harsh words over and over. The warmth from the flames couldn't chase away the chill that had settled in her chest. Rex's head rested on her lap, his brown eyes fixed on her face with unwavering loyalty. She scratched behind his ears, drawing comfort from his steady presence. "What do you think, boy?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the popping wood. "Did we make the wrong choice?" The cabin creaked around them, the blizzard still howling outside. Sarah's uniform, now dry after the previous night's ordeal, felt stiff and uncomfortable. It seemed to remind her of everything she was supposed to be: professional, by the book, following protocol to the letter. But if they'd followed protocol, would she and Rex still be alive? She glanced around Bobby's cabin, taking in the simple furnishings, the worn but clean floors, the carefully arranged tools on the workbench by the window. Nothing about this place suggested danger or criminal intent. If anything, it spoke of someone trying to build a peaceful life. Rex's ears perked up, and he lifted his head as Bobby's heavy footsteps approached from the kitchen. Sarah tensed slightly, unsure what to say after the sheriff's outburst. The floorboards creaked under Bobby's weight as he carried 2 steaming mugs of coffee. "Thought you might need this," he said quietly, offering her one of the mugs. His face remained calm, showing no sign of anger or resentment about what had just happened. "Thank you," Sarah replied, wrapping her hands around the warm ceramic. The rich aroma of coffee filled her nostrils, grounding her in the present moment. Bobby lowered himself into the chair across from her, his movements deliberate and careful, as if trying not to startle a wounded animal. They sat in silence for a few moments, both watching the dancing flames. "You know," Bobby finally spoke, his voice gentle but firm, "there was a time when I thought I'd never be anything more than what others saw me as. A criminal. A lost cause." He paused, taking a sip of his coffee. "But life has a funny way of teaching us that we're more than our labels." Sarah looked up from her mug, studying his face. The firelight cast shadows across his features, highlighting the years etched into his skin. His eyes, when they met hers, held no judgment, only understanding. "The sheriff," Bobby continued, "he sees the world in black and white. Most folks do. But life? Life happens in the gray areas." He gestured to the storm outside. "Nature doesn't care about our rules or our labels. It just is what it is." Rex shifted, moving to sit between them, his tail thumping softly against the floor. Bobby reached out slowly, letting the dog sniff his hand before giving him a gentle pat. "Sometimes," he said, "doing the right thing means breaking the rules we've set for ourselves. It's not about forgetting who we are, it's about growing into who we can be." Sarah felt something loosen in her chest, a knot she hadn't even realized was there. She watched as Rex, her highly trained police dog, leaned into Bobby's touch, completely at ease with this man the sheriff had labeled dangerous. "How did you do it?" she asked softly. "How did you change?" Bobby's expression softened, and he leaned forward in his chair. "Let me tell you about redemption." The crunch of tires on fresh snow announced the sheriff's return. Sarah stood by Bobby's window, watching Sheriff Caldwell's patrol car pull up to the cabin. Her stomach tightened. Rex sensed her tension and pressed against her leg, offering silent support. Bobby remained seated in his armchair, his weathered hands resting calmly on his knees. "You don't have to talk to him if you don't want to," he said softly. Before Sarah could respond, heavy boots thundered up the porch steps. The sheriff's knock was more like a pound, echoing through the small cabin. Sarah opened the door. Sheriff Caldwell filled the doorframe, his face red from both the cold and anger. Snow dusted his shoulders, and his breath came out in harsh clouds. "Officer Matthews," he said stiffly, "I need a word with Mr. Davis." His eyes narrowed as they landed on Bobby. Bobby stood slowly, his movements deliberate and non-threatening. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of Officer Matthews." The sheriff's jaw clenched. "Fine. Here it is plain and simple. Stay out of town, Davis. Your kind isn't welcome here. If I see you anywhere near Main Street, you'll face consequences." "My kind?" Bobby's voice remained steady, but Sarah noticed his fingers curl slightly. "You know exactly what I mean. Once a criminal, always a criminal, and you—" The sheriff turned to Sarah, his expression a mix of disappointment and frustration. "You're making a big mistake trusting him. What would the community think? Their respected officer consorting with an ex-Hell's Angel?" Sarah felt her cheeks burn. The weight of his words pressed down on her shoulders, threatening to crush her. Rex growled softly, picking up on the tension in the room. "Sheriff," Sarah began, her voice shaking slightly. She paused, took a deep breath, and found her strength. "This man saved my life. He risked his own safety in that blizzard to help me and Rex. Where was the department then?" "We had search parties." "That wouldn't have found us in time," Sarah cut him off. Her voice grew stronger with each word. "I've served this community faithfully for 15 years. I've followed every rule, put my duty first, sacrificed my personal life for this job. But I won't stand here and let you threaten the man who saved me." The sheriff's face darkened. "You're letting your emotions cloud your judgment, Matthews. This isn't like you." "Maybe that's exactly who I am." Sarah stepped forward, standing between the sheriff and Bobby. "I make my own decisions, Tom. I don't need your approval, and I certainly don't need your protection from someone who's shown nothing but kindness." Sheriff Caldwell's mouth opened, then closed. He glared at Bobby one last time before turning on his heel. The door slammed behind him, rattling the windows. Through the glass, Sarah watched him storm back to his car, kick up snow as he reversed, and disappear down the snowy road. The cabin fell silent except for the crackling of the fireplace. Sarah's hands trembled as the adrenaline faded. She'd never spoken to the sheriff like that before. The weight of what she'd done settled over her like a heavy blanket. She felt caught between two worlds, the structured, familiar world of law enforcement she'd always known, and this new reality where things weren't as black and white as she'd once believed. Rex whined softly and pressed his nose into her palm. Sarah sank into the nearest chair, suddenly exhausted. She'd chosen her path, but she'd never felt more alone. The morning air was crisp and cold as Bobby led Sarah along a narrow trail behind his cabin. Rex padded along beside them, his paws crunching in the fresh snow. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a pristine white landscape that sparkled in the early sunlight. "Watch your step here," Bobby said, helping Sarah over a fallen log. His large, tattooed hand was gentle as he steadied her. "The path gets a bit tricky." Sarah nodded, still processing the sheriff's angry departure. Her boots sank into the deep snow with each step, but the physical effort helped clear her mind. The forest was peaceful, with snow-laden branches creating a natural ceiling above them. "You know," Bobby began, his voice quiet but clear in the still morning air, "I used to think strength meant never backing down, never showing weakness." He paused beside a large oak tree, running his hand over its rough bark. "That's what the angels taught me, but I was wrong." Sarah stopped beside him, watching his face. The morning light caught the silver in his beard, and his eyes were distant with memory. "I spent 15 years with them," he continued. "Did things I'm not proud of, things that keep me up at night sometimes." He glanced at Sarah, his expression open and honest. "But the hardest thing I ever did was walk away." Rex whined softly and pressed against Sarah's leg. She scratched behind his ears, waiting for Bobby to continue. "The night I left, we'd just finished a job that went bad. Real bad." Bobby's voice grew rough. "There was this kid, couldn't have been more than 16, caught in the crossfire. He made it, thank God, but—" He shook his head. "That was my wake-up call." They resumed walking, following the trail as it wound through stands of white pine and birch. The only sounds were their footsteps and the occasional creak of snow-laden branches. "The angels, they were my family," Bobby said. "Walking away meant losing everything I thought I needed, but staying meant losing myself." He stopped at a small clearing where a wooden bench sat beneath a massive maple tree. "Took me years to find peace out here, to learn that real strength isn't about power or control. It's about having the courage to change." Sarah sat on the bench, brushing away some snow. Rex settled at her feet as Bobby joined her. "When I saw you and Rex in that storm," he said, "I knew what some people would think. Ex-biker helping a cop, looks suspicious, but I couldn't just drive by. That's not who I am anymore. Sarah felt tears prick at her eyes. The sheriff doesn't see that, she said softly. No, he doesn't, Bobby agreed. But that's his problem, not mine. I know who I am now, and that's enough. Sarah looked at him. Really looked at him. At the tattoos that told stories of his past. At the calm strength in his weathered face. At the kindness in his eyes that no amount of hardship had managed to extinguish. Thank you, she said, her voice thick with emotion. Not just for saving us, but for... She gestured vaguely at the peaceful forest around them. For showing me all this. For helping me understand. Bobby nodded, understanding in his eyes. Sometimes we get so caught up in what others think is right, we forget to listen to our own hearts. He smiled slightly. Took me a long time to learn that lesson. Sarah felt something shift inside her, like a weight lifting. She'd spent so many years trying to meet everyone's expectations, trying to be the perfect officer, that she'd almost forgotten how to trust her own judgment. The morning sun painted the snow-covered landscape in brilliant white, making Sarah squint as she stepped onto Bobby's front porch. The storm had finally passed, leaving behind a pristine blanket of snow that stretched as far as the eye could see. Rex stood beside her, his tail wagging gently as he watched a few birds dart between the snow-laden pine trees. Looks like the worst is over, Bobby said, his deep voice carrying across the crisp morning air. He leaned against the wooden railing, his tattooed arms crossed over his chest. Despite his intimidating appearance, Sarah had come to see the gentleness in his eyes. Sarah nodded, pulling her jacket closer. I should head back to the station. They'll be wondering where I am. She paused, struggling to find the right words. Bobby, I don't know how to thank you for everything you've done. Bobby shook his head. No need for thanks. You've got important work to do. He scratched Rex behind the ears, earning an appreciative whine from the police dog. This guy needs to get back to protecting the community, and so do you. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes. After everything the sheriff said... Don't let his words get to you, Bobby interrupted, his voice firm but kind. What matters is what you know in your heart. You're good at what you do, Sarah. The community needs you. He disappeared inside the cabin for a moment, leaving Sarah to pat Rex's head and gather her thoughts. The past few days had changed something inside her, shifted her perspective in ways she couldn't quite explain. When Bobby returned, he held something in his weathered hands. Before you go, I want you to have this. He opened his palm to reveal a small wooden carving of a wolf, its features simple, but somehow capturing a fierce determination in its expression. I made this years ago when I first moved out here, Bobby explained, placing it in Sarah's gloved hand. It reminded me that even when we feel lost, we all have strength within us. Sometimes we just need someone to help us see it. Sarah ran her thumb over the smooth surface of the carving, feeling its warmth despite the cold morning air. Bobby, I can't take this. You can, and you will, he said with a gentle smile. Keep it with you. When things get tough, remember these days. Remember that you're stronger than you think. Sarah closed her fingers around the wooden wolf, nodding as she fought back tears. Rex pressed against her leg, offering silent support as always. She took a deep breath of the crisp winter air and straightened her shoulders. I'll keep it with me, she promised, carefully tucking the carving into her jacket pocket. Always. Bobby nodded, satisfaction crossing his features. Good. Now get going. Your town needs its officer back. Sarah whistled for Rex, who immediately stood at attention. As they made their way to the patrol car Bobby had helped recover yesterday, she felt a new sense of purpose filling her chest. The wooden wolf sat heavy in her pocket, a reminder of these strange and transformative days. Bobby had already arranged for her car to be brought up from the crash site, and it sat ready in his driveway, cleaned of snow and checked over by his experienced hands. As Sarah opened the driver's door, she turned back one last time to look at the man who had saved not just her life, but something deeper within her soul. Sarah pulled her patrol car onto Main Street, the familiar storefronts and buildings now bathed in morning light. The blizzard had left everything covered in a thick blanket of pristine white snow. Rex sat in the back, his ears perked up as they drove past the local diner. Everything looked the same, but Sarah felt different inside. Mrs. Henderson, who usually waved cheerfully from her flower shop, quickly turned away when Sarah drove past. Outside the hardware store, two men stopped their conversation to stare, their faces a mix of concern and judgment. Sarah's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "At least you're still on my side, buddy," she said, glancing at Rex in the rearview mirror. He let out a soft whine in response. The whispers followed her down the street. Outside the grocery store, she spotted Linda, one of her regular coffee friends, huddled with a group of women. As Sarah's patrol car approached, their heads turned, and their voices dropped to hushed tones. Linda caught Sarah's eye for a moment before looking away quickly. Sarah's chest tightened. These were the same people who had trusted her for years, who had called her for help with everything from lost cats to teenage pranks. Now they looked at her like she was a stranger. Pulling into the station's parking lot, Sarah took a deep breath. The familiar brick building loomed before her, its windows reflecting the morning sun. Officers Johnson and Martinez stood by the entrance, their conversation stopping abruptly as she parked. "Come on, Rex," Sarah said, opening the back door. Rex jumped out, shaking himself before falling into step beside her. His presence gave her strength as she walked toward the entrance. Johnson and Martinez nodded stiffly as she passed. The usual friendly banter was noticeably absent. Inside, the usual buzz of activity in the station fell to a hush. Sarah felt every eye on her as she made her way to her desk. "Officer Matthews," called a stern voice. "My office, now." Chief Parker stood in his doorway, his face unreadable. Sarah straightened her shoulders and followed him inside, Rex staying close to her side. The chief settled behind his desk, his expression hard. "Do you have any idea what kind of position you've put us in?" he asked, his voice low and controlled. "Associating with a known former gang member?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Bobby Davis saved my life, sir, and Rex's too. He interfered with an official search and rescue operation," the chief countered. "We had teams ready to deploy. Your judgment was compromised by the crash." "With all due respect, sir," Sarah said, her voice firm. "I wouldn't be here if it wasn't for him. The storm was getting worse by the minute. Bobby got us to safety when no one else could reach us." The chief leaned forward. "Your association with this man reflects poorly on the entire department. People are talking, Matthews. They're questioning your judgment." Sarah felt a flash of anger. "Bobby Davis is not the same person he was years ago. He's changed. I saw that firsthand." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Sometimes people deserve a second chance. Isn't that what we're supposed to stand for?" Rex pressed against her leg, and Sarah drew strength from his steady presence. The chief's face remained stern, but Sarah refused to back down. She knew in her heart that trusting Bobby had been the right choice, even if the whole town disagreed. "I stand by my actions, sir," she said quietly. "Bobby Davis saved 2 lives that night. That's what matters." Sarah sat across from Sheriff Caldwell in his office, her back straight and tense as she listened to him outline the new case. The morning light filtered through dusty blinds, casting shadows across his weathered face. Rex lay at her feet, ever faithful, his warm presence giving her strength. "We've got reports of suspicious activity near the old mill," Caldwell said, his voice clipped and professional. He spread photos across his desk, carefully avoiding eye contact. Multiple break-ins over the past week. Sarah leaned forward to examine the pictures, aware of the heavy silence between them. The images showed broken windows, scattered debris, and spray-painted walls. "Any leads?" she asked, keeping her voice steady and professional. "Nothing concrete." Caldwell shuffled some papers, his movements stiff. "I want you to patrol the area, set up surveillance. Standard procedure." The words "standard procedure" hung in the air like an accusation. Sarah felt the weight of unspoken judgment pressing down on her shoulders. Other officers passing by the office window would glance in, then quickly look away when she noticed them. "Yes, sir," Sarah replied, reaching down to pat Rex's head. "When do you want us to start?" "Tonight." Caldwell finally met her eyes, his expression hard. "And Matthews? Keep everything by the book this time. No unauthorized assistance." The reference to Bobby was clear. Sarah's jaw tightened, but she kept her composure. "Understood, Sheriff." As she gathered the case files, Officer Jenkins stepped into the doorway. He hesitated before speaking, as if uncertain whether to address her directly. "The Miller family called about their missing cat again. Think you could check it out on your way to the mill?" "Of course," Sarah replied, noticing how Jenkins spoke more to the sheriff than to her. She stood, gesturing for Rex to follow. "I'll handle both." Walking through the station felt like moving through molasses. Conversations died as she passed, replaced by whispers that started up again behind her. Sarah kept her head high, though each step felt heavier than the last. At her desk, she began organizing the case materials, trying to focus on the task at hand, rather than the isolation surrounding her. Rex whined softly, sensing her discomfort, and pressed against her leg. "It's okay, boy," she murmured, scratching behind his ears. "We've got work to do." The morning crawled by as Sarah mapped out patrol routes and reviewed security footage from near the mill. She took a break around noon, heading to the break room for coffee. The room emptied quickly after she entered, leaving her alone with the humming vending machine. Sarah was just returning to her desk when her phone rang. The caller ID showed the local animal shelter's number, where Rex stayed during her rare days off. "Officer Matthews speaking," she answered, settling into her chair. The shelter manager's voice came through, tight with concern. "Officer Matthews, I'm calling about Rex. He was scheduled for his routine checkup today, but when we went to collect him from the station's kennel area, he wasn't there." Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her hand, spilling across her desk. "What do you mean he's not there?" She spun in her chair, but Rex wasn't at her feet where he had been just moments before. Her heart began to race. "He was right here with me all morning." "None of our staff has seen him," the manager replied. "We thought maybe there was a schedule mix-up, but—" Sarah stood up so quickly her chair rolled back against the wall. She scanned the office desperately, but there was no sign of her faithful partner anywhere. Sarah's hands trembled as she gripped her flashlight, sweeping its beam across the station's parking lot. The sun was setting, casting long shadows that made her search even more difficult. "Rex," she called out, her voice cracking with emotion. "Rex, where are you?" She checked behind every vehicle, her breath coming in short gasps. The last time she'd seen him was right after their meeting with the sheriff. Rex had been resting in his usual spot near her desk, but when she returned from filing paperwork, he was gone. The cold air bit at her cheeks as she jogged down the sidewalk, checking every alley and doorway. Her mind raced with horrible possibilities. Had someone taken him? Was this some kind of revenge? Or had he wandered off, still confused from their accident in the blizzard? "Please, buddy," she whispered, fighting back tears. "Where are you?" Sarah pulled out her phone and called the station again. "Any sign of him?" she asked the dispatcher. "Nothing yet, Officer Matthews. We've got 3 patrol cars looking. Her colleagues were helping, but it didn't ease the knot in her stomach. Rex wasn't just her partner. He was family. The thought of him out there alone, possibly hurt, made her feel sick. She headed toward the park where they usually did their morning exercises. Her flashlight beam cut through the growing darkness, illuminating empty benches and scattered leaves. "Rex!" she called again, her voice echoing off the nearby buildings. As she rounded the corner near the old warehouse district, Sarah heard a faint whimper. She froze, listening intently. There it was again. A soft, pained sound coming from behind a dumpster. "Rex?" she called softly, approaching slowly. Her flashlight beam caught a glimpse of fur, and her heart leaped. There he was, curled up in the corner, his head low and one of his back legs held at an awkward angle. When he saw her, his tail gave a weak wag. "Oh, Rex," Sarah breathed, dropping to her knees beside him. She ran her hands gently over his body, checking for injuries. His back leg was scraped and swollen, but nothing seemed broken. Rex whined and pressed his head against her chest. "I've got you, buddy," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. "I've got you." She pulled out her phone and called the station. "I found him. We need a vet. He's hurt, but alive." As she waited for help to arrive, Sarah held Rex close, her mind spinning with questions. How did he get here? What had happened to his leg? But mostly, she felt an overwhelming sense of relief mixed with determination. She thought about everything that had happened since the blizzard. Bobby's kindness, the sheriff's suspicion, her colleagues' doubt. Through it all, Rex had been her constant, her anchor. Now, seeing him hurt and vulnerable, she realized something important. She couldn't let other people's judgments hold her back anymore. "We're going to be okay," she murmured to Rex, scratching behind his ears. He looked up at her with trusting eyes, and she felt her resolve strengthen. This wasn't just about proving herself anymore. It was about protecting what mattered most. Rex had always been there for her, and now she needed to be strong for both of them. In the distance, she heard sirens approaching. Help was coming. Sarah hugged Rex closer, feeling his steady heartbeat against her chest. They would get through this together, just like they always had. Sarah stood in Sheriff Caldwell's office, her shoulders back and head high despite her exhaustion. The morning sun streamed through the dusty blinds, casting long shadows across his desk. His face was stern, lined with disapproval as he looked up at her from his chair. "Officer Matthews, your recent behavior has me questioning your judgment," he said, his voice hard and cold. "Accepting help from a former Hell's Angel? Staying at his cabin? What were you thinking?" Sarah's hands clenched at her sides. The small token Bobby had given her pressed against her palm in her pocket, reminding her of everything she'd learned during those stormy nights. "With all due respect, sir, I was thinking about survival," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "Bobby Davis saved my life. He saved Rex's life, too." The sheriff's face reddened. "That's not the point, Matthews. You're an officer of the law. Your actions reflect on this entire department. How do you think it looks when one of our own is cozying up to an ex-gang member?" "Cozying up?" Sarah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "I nearly died in that blizzard. Bobby was the only one who found us, the only one who helped. He's not the person you think he is." "He's exactly who I think he is," Caldwell snapped, standing up. "A criminal. Once a Hell's Angel, always a Hell's Angel. And you're too emotional to see it clearly." Sarah thought about Bobby's quiet strength, his gentle way with Rex, the honest conversations they'd shared about redemption and change. The sheriff's words felt hollow in comparison. "No, sir," she said firmly. "I see things more clearly now than I ever have. People can change. They deserve second chances. Isn't that what we're supposed to believe in? Isn't that why we wear this badge?" Caldwell's eyes narrowed. Watch yourself, Matthews. Your position here isn't guaranteed. Maybe you need some time off to get your head straight. Sarah felt something shift inside her. All the doubt and fear she'd been carrying suddenly transformed into certainty. She thought about Rex, about Bobby, about every person she'd ever helped in her years of service. "My head is perfectly straight, Sheriff," she said, her voice strong and clear. "I became an officer to protect people, all people, even the ones society has given up on. That's what I did during the blizzard, and that's what I'll keep doing." The sheriff stared at her, surprise flickering across his face. He wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by her. "Is that what you really think?" he asked, his voice dangerously quiet. "Yes, sir, it is." Sarah met his gaze without flinching. "I understand if you want to punish me for what happened, but I won't apologize for accepting help when I needed it, or for seeing the good in someone you've already condemned." She touched the token in her pocket again, drawing strength from it. In that moment, everything became crystal clear. Her job wasn't about following rules blindly or maintaining appearances. It was about protecting people, helping them, believing in their capacity for change. That was her true calling, and no one could take that away from her. The sheriff opened his mouth to respond, but Sarah had already said everything she needed to say. She stood tall, filled with a newfound sense of purpose. She might face consequences for standing up to him, but she knew in her heart she was right. This was who she was meant to be. Not just an officer following orders, but someone who truly believed in protecting and serving everyone in her community, no matter their past. Sarah stood at the edge of the abandoned warehouse district, her breath forming small clouds in the cold morning air. Rex sat alertly by her side, his ears perked forward. The sheriff's latest case had led them here, tracking down a dangerous drug dealer who'd been targeting their small town's elderly residents with fake prescription medications. What the sheriff didn't know was that Bobby had been quietly helping her piece together the puzzle. His past connections and street knowledge had proven invaluable, pointing her toward this location where the dealer supposedly stored his supplies. "Ready, boy?" Sarah whispered to Rex, giving him a gentle pat. The German shepherd's tail wagged once in response, but he remained focused and still. Sarah's radio crackled. "Matthews, what's your position?" The sheriff's voice came through. "North entrance, sir. Rex has picked up a fresh scent." She thought back to Bobby's words from earlier that morning. "Watch the loading docks," he'd told her over coffee at his cabin. "These guys always keep a vehicle ready for a quick escape." Sarah moved carefully along the perimeter, Rex leading the way. True to Bobby's prediction, she spotted an unmarked van backed up to one of the loading bays. She radioed in the information to dispatch. Rex suddenly tensed, his nose working overtime. Sarah recognized his body language. Someone was nearby. She pressed herself against the cold metal wall, listening intently. Footsteps echoed from inside, moving toward the door. The suspect emerged, carrying a large duffel bag. Sarah stepped out, her voice strong and clear. "Police! Drop the bag and put your hands where I can see them." The man froze for a split second before bolting towards the van. Rex sprang into action at Sarah's command, quickly closing the distance. The suspect changed direction, heading for a chain-link fence instead. Sarah pursued on foot while radioing her position. Rex had already circled around, cutting off the suspect's escape route. The man skidded to a stop, trapped between Sarah, Rex, and the approaching sound of police sirens. "It's over," Sarah called out, her voice firm but calm. "Make it easier on yourself." The suspect's shoulders slumped in defeat. As Sarah moved in to make the arrest, she noticed his face. She recognized him as a former pharmacy technician who'd been fired 6 months ago. Within minutes, the warehouse was swarming with officers. The sheriff arrived just as Sarah was reading the suspect his rights. The duffel bag contained exactly what they'd been looking for: counterfeit medications and documentation of sales to elderly victims. The sheriff approached Sarah, his expression unreadable. "Officer Matthews?" he began, then paused. "Sarah, this is excellent work. How did you know where to look?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "Good police work, sir. And I had help from someone who knows these streets better than most." Understanding flickered across the sheriff's face. Instead of anger, though, she saw something like respect in his eyes. "Sometimes," he said slowly, "we need to look past our prejudices to see the truth. You've reminded me of that." As the scene cleared, several elderly residents who'd been victims of the scheme came forward to thank her. Mrs. Henderson, who'd lost her life savings to the fake medications, hugged Sarah tightly. "You're a blessing to this town, dear," she said, tears in her eyes. Rex sat proudly beside Sarah, accepting gentle pats from the grateful citizens. Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders as she watched the community come together. Looking toward the tree line, she caught a glimpse of a familiar motorcycle slipping quietly away. She smiled, knowing that redemption came in many forms, and sometimes the most unlikely partnerships could bring about the greatest good. The morning sun broke through the clouds, warming her face. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt truly at peace with her place in the world. Sarah stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning sun cast long shadows across her backyard. Rex lounged on the porch, his tail wagging lazily as he basked in the warmth. The bruises from the crash had faded, but the memories remained. Not as scars, but as reminders of how much she'd grown. She sipped her coffee, remembering the chaos of the past few weeks. The whispers at the station had slowly died down, replaced by a newfound respect from her fellow officers. Even the sheriff had come around, especially after she'd helped solve that difficult case last week. A familiar rumble of a motorcycle engine drew her attention. Bobby's bike pulled into her driveway, and Rex's ears perked up at the sound. Sarah smiled, setting down her coffee cup and heading outside. "Morning, Sarah," Bobby called out, removing his helmet. He looked different now, more at peace with himself. The tension that had always seemed to hover around him had eased. "You're up early," she said, descending the porch steps. Rex trotted over to greet Bobby, who scratched behind the dog's ears. "Thought I'd stop by before heading out," Bobby replied, his voice carrying a note of finality that made Sarah pause. "Heading out?" she asked, though she'd known this day would come. Bobby wasn't the type to stay in one place too long. Bobby nodded, leaning against his bike. "Got word of some folks up north who could use some help. Figure it's time to move on." Sarah understood. Just as she'd found her path here, Bobby needed to follow his own. "You've done a lot of good here," she said, thinking of all the ways he'd helped not just her, but others in the community who'd needed it. "Maybe," Bobby said with a slight smile. "But you're the one who showed them that people can change. Standing up to the sheriff, keeping your badge, proving yourself, that took real courage." Sarah felt her throat tighten with emotion. "I had a good teacher," she said softly. Bobby reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small wooden carving. A wolf, intricately detailed. "Made this last night. Reminded me of you and Rex. Strong, loyal, protective." Sarah took the carving, running her fingers over the smooth surface. "It's beautiful, Bobby. Thank you." "You know," Bobby said, looking out at the rising sun, "when I first left the Angels, I thought I'd never find peace. But helping others, making things right, it gives life meaning." "I understand that now," Sarah replied. "Sometimes we have to lose our way to find a better path." Rex whined softly, pressing against Sarah's leg. She reached down to scratch his head, grateful for his constant presence through everything. "Take care of yourself, Sarah," Bobby said, putting his helmet back on. "And keep doing what you do best, protecting those who need it." Sarah stepped forward and gave him a quick hug. "You too, Bobby. And thank you. For everything." Bobby mounted his bike, the engine rumbling to life. Sarah and Rex stood on the porch, watching as he backed out of the driveway. He gave one final wave before heading down the street, the sound of his motorcycle gradually fading into the distance. Sarah looked down at the wooden wolf in her hands, then at Rex beside her. She felt stronger than she had in years, more sure of herself and her place in the world. The morning sun was warm on her face, and she knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was ready to face them. Sarah Matthews stood at her favorite lookout point above the small town, her breath forming small clouds in the crisp morning air. Rex sat beside her, his fur glistening with tiny snowflakes. The town below was covered in a pristine blanket of white, the aftermath of the blizzard that had changed her life forever. She ran her fingers through Rex's thick fur, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. "We've come a long way, haven't we, boy?" she whispered. Rex looked up at her with those understanding brown eyes, and she smiled, remembering how close she'd come to losing him. The morning sun painted the snow-covered rooftops in shades of pink and gold. Sarah pulled Bobby's handmade token from her pocket, a small wooden compass he'd carved during their time together at his cabin. The surface was smooth from her habit of running her thumb over it whenever she needed strength. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find our way," Bobby had told her when he'd given it to her. Those words echoed in her mind now, and she understood them better than ever. Sarah watched as the town slowly came to life below. Shop owners cleared their sidewalks, children trudged to school with backpacks bouncing, and her fellow officers began their morning patrols. It all looked the same as it had before the blizzard, but Sarah knew she saw it differently now. The weight of her badge felt different too, not lighter exactly, but more balanced. She'd always worn it as armor, using her sense of duty as a shield against vulnerability. Now she understood that true strength came from being both tough and tender, from knowing when to stand firm and when to accept help. She thought about the sheriff's initial anger, how it had melted into respect when he'd seen how she handled herself during that final case. She remembered the townspeople's whispers turning to waves and warm greetings. Most of all, she thought about Bobby, who had taught her that second chances weren't just for other people, they were for her too. Rex nudged her hand, reminding her it was time for their morning patrol. Sarah gave him a gentle pat and headed back to her cruiser. As she settled behind the wheel, she felt different than she had just weeks ago. The rigid posture of constant vigilance had softened into something more natural, more human. She drove through the familiar streets, past the diner where she got her morning coffee, past the hardware store where old Mr. Jenkins always had a treat for Rex. People waved as she passed, genuine smiles replacing the guarded looks she'd grown used to. Mrs. Thompson, who ran the flower shop, called out a cheerful good morning. The kids waiting at the school bus stop pointed excitedly at Rex in the back seat. Sarah waved back, feeling the warmth of belonging wash over her. She wasn't just Officer Matthews anymore, the tough cop who kept everyone at arm's length. She was Sarah, someone who had faced her own storms and emerged stronger, someone who understood that vulnerability could be its own kind of strength. Rex woofed softly from the back seat, and Sarah glanced in the rearview mirror to see his tail wagging. "You feel it too, don't you?" she asked, and his ears perked up at her voice. The morning sun streamed through her windshield, warming her face as she patrolled the streets of the town she'd always protected, but was only now beginning to truly call home. Sarah sat at her desk, organizing reports from the previous week. Rex lounged by her feet, his warm presence a constant comfort. The morning sun streamed through the station windows, making the leftover snow crystals sparkle like diamonds. Everything felt different now. Better, somehow. The whispers had died down, and her fellow officers had started treating her with the same respect they'd shown before the incident. The phone on her desk rang, breaking through her thoughts. Sarah picked it up, her voice steady and professional. "Officer Matthews speaking?" "Sarah, we've got a situation," Dispatcher Tom said, his voice urgent. "Got a call from a stranded motorist out on Highway 23, about 15 miles north of town. Car went off the road. Driver's okay, but scared." Sarah was already reaching for her coat before Tom finished speaking. "Any injuries reported?" "Driver says she's fine, just shaken up. But with these temperatures—" Tom's voice trailed off meaningfully. "I'm on it," Sarah said, standing up. Rex's ears perked up, and he rose to his feet, instantly alert. "Send me the exact coordinates." As she pulled on her heavy winter coat, Sarah thought about that night when she'd been the one stranded in the snow. The memory no longer filled her with dread. Instead, it reminded her of the unexpected kindness she'd found in Bobby, and the strength she'd discovered within herself. She checked her emergency kit, making sure everything was in order: blankets, first aid supplies, flares, and extra water. She'd added a few items since her own accident, things she wished she'd had that night. Her hand brushed against the small wooden token Bobby had given her, now attached to her keychain. It brought a smile to her face. "Come on, boy," she called to Rex, who trotted eagerly to her side. "We've got work to do." The station was quiet as she made her way through it, but the silence felt comfortable now, not oppressive. Officer Jenkins gave her a respectful nod as she passed, and Deputy Rodriguez called out, "Stay safe out there, Matthews." Sarah paused at the door, checking her radio and phone one last time. She thought about how different things were now, how she no longer felt she had to prove anything to anyone. Her worth wasn't measured by others' opinions, but by the lives she touched and the help she provided. Rex jumped into the back of the patrol car, settling into his spot as Sarah started the engine. The heater hummed to life, pushing back against the winter chill. She checked her GPS for the coordinates Tom had sent, plotting the best route in her mind. The snow had started falling again, light flurries dancing in the morning air. But Sarah wasn't worried. She knew these roads like the back of her hand, and more importantly, she knew her own capabilities. The fear that had gripped her after her accident had transformed into something else, a deeper understanding of both her strengths and her limitations. She pulled out of the station parking lot, flicking on her emergency lights. The familiar weight of responsibility settled over her shoulders, but it felt different now, less like a burden and more like a purpose. Rex's steady breathing behind her matched the rhythm of the windshield wipers as they cleared away the falling snow. The road stretched out before her, disappearing into the white landscape. Sarah adjusted her grip on the steering wheel, feeling the solid presence of the patrol car beneath her. She was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead, knowing that each person she helped was another chance to pay forward the kindness she'd received that stormy night. Sarah stood by the window of her office at the police station, watching snowflakes dance in the morning light. Rex lounged contentedly at her feet, his tail thumping softly against the floor whenever she glanced down at him. The morning was quiet, peaceful, so different from that stormy night that had changed everything. Her fingers traced the small wooden token Bobby had given her before he left. She kept it in her pocket now, a reminder of the lessons she'd learned. The rough texture of the carved wood brought back memories of his cabin, the warmth of the fire, and the unexpected kindness of a man society had taught her to mistrust. "Things aren't always what they seem, are they, boy?" she murmured to Rex. His ears perked up at her voice, and he lifted his head to look at her with those knowing brown eyes. The past few months had reshaped her understanding of herself and her role in the community. She thought back to that terrifying night of the crash, how helpless she'd felt as the patrol car spun out of control, the bitter cold seeping into her bones as she and Rex huddled together, waiting for help that seemed would never come. Then Bobby had appeared, like some unlikely guardian angel in leather and tattoos. Sarah smiled at the memory. How quick she'd been to judge him at first, despite his help. How wrong she'd been. The sheriff's harsh words and accusations still echoed in her mind sometimes, but they didn't sting anymore. She'd learned that doing the right thing didn't always mean following the rules to the letter. Sometimes it meant trusting your instincts, giving people second chances, and being willing to see beyond surface appearances. Sarah moved away from the window and settled into her chair, Rex following to lay at her feet. Her badge caught the morning light, gleaming on her desk. It meant something different to her now. Not just authority and duty, but compassion and understanding, too. The whole experience had taught her that strength wasn't about maintaining a tough exterior or never accepting help. Real strength came from being vulnerable enough to let others in, to learn from unexpected teachers, and to admit when your preconceptions were wrong. She thought of Bobby, wherever he was now, probably working on someone's car or helping another lost soul find their way. His words about redemption had struck a chord deep within her. "We all deserve a second chance," he'd told her. "Sometimes we just need someone to believe in us first." Looking down at Rex, Sarah remembered how close she'd come to losing him that night. Her hand reached down to scratch behind his ears, and he leaned into her touch, eyes half closed in contentment. They'd both healed from their injuries, but the experience had left them with something valuable, a deeper appreciation for life's unexpected turns and the goodness that could be found in the most unlikely places. The morning sun cast long shadows across her desk as Sarah settled into her daily routine. She felt different now, stronger, but also softer in ways that mattered. The rigid boundaries she'd built around herself had melted away like snow in spring, leaving room for growth and new understanding. Through the window, she could see the snow-covered landscape stretching out before her. The same view that had once filled her with anxiety now brought a sense of peace. Every snowflake, every icy crystal catching the light reminded her of that night, but not with fear or regret. Instead, she felt gratitude for the journey that had led her here, to this moment of quiet clarity. Sarah felt settled in her skin in a way she never had before. The world outside might still be cold and unpredictable, but she was ready for it, whatever it might bring. Sarah's patrol car hummed quietly as she drove down the familiar streets toward home. The setting sun painted the snow-covered landscape in soft oranges and pinks, reminding her of those first moments in Bobby's cabin. She glanced at Rex, sleeping peacefully in the back seat, and smiled. The memories of that fateful blizzard felt both distant and crystal clear. Her fingers traced the small wooden token Bobby had given her, now hanging from her rearview mirror. It was a simple thing, just a piece of carved wood with a hawk etched into it. But it meant everything. The token swayed gently as she turned onto Main Street, catching the last rays of sunlight. "You know, Rex," she said softly, "Bobby taught me more in those few days than I learned in 15 years on the force." Rex's ears perked up at the sound of her voice, but he remained curled up in his spot. The streets were quiet now, with only a few people hurrying home from work. Sarah noticed Mrs. Henderson waving from her porch and returned the gesture with a warm smile. There was a time, not so long ago, when such simple interactions felt forced, like she was playing a role rather than being herself. "It's funny," she continued, more to herself than to Rex, "how we get so caught up in what others think, All those years trying to prove myself, trying to be the perfect officer. She shook her head, remembering the weight of expectations she'd carried for so long. Bobby's words echoed in her mind. The uniform ain't who you are, Sarah. It's just what you do. Such a simple truth, but it had taken a former Hell's Angel to help her see it. She chuckled at the irony. The patrol car crested the hill that overlooked the town, and Sarah pulled over to the shoulder. This spot had always been special to her, a place where she could see the entire community spread out below. But now it held new meaning. This was where Bobby had first talked to her about redemption, about how change comes from within. She stepped out of the car, letting the crisp evening air fill her lungs. Rex followed, stretching his legs and padding over to stand beside her. Together they looked out over the town they protected. The lights were starting to come on in windows, creating a warm glow against the darkening sky. Sarah reached down to scratch behind Rex's ears. "We're not just cops anymore, boy," she said softly. "We're part of something bigger." Rex leaned against her leg, offering his silent support as always. The wind carried the distant sound of children laughing, probably heading home for dinner. Sarah remembered a time when such sounds merely registered as background noise to her patrol duties. Now, they were reminders of the community she served, not just as an officer, but as a person who understood what it meant to need help, to be vulnerable, to trust. Bobby had shown her that strength wasn't about maintaining a perfect image or living up to others' expectations. True strength came from accepting who you were, flaws and all, and using that knowledge to help others. Sarah took one last deep breath of the evening air. The horizon stretched endlessly before her, painted in deepening shades of purple and blue. She felt lighter somehow, as if the badge on her chest was no longer a burden, but simply a part of who she was. Not the whole story, just a chapter in a much larger book. Rex nudged her hand, reminding her it was time to go. Sarah gave him a pat and looked out over the town one last time. The future stretched out before her, full of possibilities she never would have imagined before that stormy night. The morning sun painted the snow-covered town in shades of gold and pink. Sarah Matthews stood at her usual spot near the police station, watching as the townspeople went about their daily routines. Rex sat beside her, his warm presence a constant reminder of everything they'd been through together. Mrs. Henderson from the bakery waved as she unlocked her shop door. "Morning, Officer Matthews. Got some fresh treats for Rex today." Sarah smiled and touched the small wooden token in her pocket, Bobby's parting gift. It had become a habit, a reminder of the strength she'd found during those challenging days. The weight of judgment that had once pressed down on her shoulders had lifted, replaced by something lighter, more peaceful. "Come on, boy," she said to Rex, walking toward the bakery. The bell chimed as they entered, and the warm scent of fresh bread wrapped around them like a blanket. "Here you go," Mrs. Henderson said, holding out a dog biscuit for Rex. "You know, Officer Matthews, I was just telling my husband how different things feel around here lately. Good different." Sarah knew what she meant. The town had changed, or maybe she had changed, and the town had followed suit. The whispers that had once haunted her steps had turned into warm greetings. Even the sheriff, who'd been so adamantly against her choices, had come to respect her unwavering dedication to both duty and compassion. As they walked their morning patrol route, Sarah noticed little things she might have missed before. Children building snowmen in their front yards, elderly couples helping each other navigate icy patches on the sidewalk, neighbors shoveling each other's driveways. The town had always been like this, she realized. She'd just been too focused on maintaining her tough exterior to truly see it. Rex's ears perked up as they passed the spot where Bobby's motorcycle had once appeared out of the blizzard. The road had been cleared long ago, but Sarah could still picture that moment clearly. the headlight cutting through the storm, hope emerging from darkness. "Things work out in strange ways, don't they, boy?" she said, scratching behind Rex's ears. He looked up at her with those understanding eyes, and she knew he felt it too, that sense of everything falling into place. At the coffee shop, Officer Jensen waved her over. There was none of the previous tension that had existed between them after the incident. Instead, he pulled out a chair for her, genuine respect in his eyes. "The chief wanted me to tell you. That domestic case you handled yesterday? The family called to thank you specifically. Said they'd never met an officer who showed such understanding." Sarah nodded, warmth spreading through her chest. She'd approached that situation differently than she might have before. Listening more, judging less, finding solutions instead of just enforcing rules. Bobby's lessons about redemption and second chances had changed more than just her personal outlook. Rex rested his head on her lap as she sipped her coffee, and Sarah realized something profound. She'd finally found her place. Not just as Officer Matthews, the dedicated cop, but as Sarah, someone who could be both strong and compassionate, both an authority figure and a source of understanding. The morning light streamed through the coffee shop windows, catching the badge on her chest. It gleamed, but it no longer felt like a shield she had to hide behind. Instead, it was simply a part of who she was, one facet of a much richer whole. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story, and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.